Throughout the little over a year since the Switch 2 came out, we've had numerous first-party exclusives from Nintendo. Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, Pokemon Pokopia, Kirby Air Riders, Mario Tennis Fever, and a few more, with multiple games on the horizon such as Fire Emblem Fortune's Weave, Nintendo Switch Sports Resort, and at the time of this script, Splatoon Raiders comes out in 10 days. However, throughout all of Nintendo's lineup, I feel like the game that is most overlooked and not talked about is Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment. Age of Imprisonment was announced during the Switch 2 Direct, supposedly being a canon prequel to Tears of the Kingdom. This is a game that I was definitely interested in, but at the time, I wanted to see a little bit more. Tears of the Kingdom's story was pretty god-awful, to say the least, and the gameplay didn't look that much different from Age of Calamity, so I wanted to see more from the game. And seeing that every other Switch 2 game got a Direct before release, in fact, Kirby Air Riders got 2, so I assumed that Age of Imprisonment would give us a Direct before release. We did not get a Direct before release. We only got a few small trailers, and while what I saw looked cool enough, Sync Strikes looked cool, there was a Link construct adding a bit of intrigue to the story, the bosses from Tears of the Kingdom looked to have cool redesigns, and getting extra context on Tears of the Kingdom story could be cool, since it was confirmed multiple times to be canon, and as someone who likes Warrior-style games and enjoyed the first 2 Hyrule Warriors games, the game looked fun. However, $70 for this game seemed insane, and considering we didn't get any major trailers, there was still a lot up in the air about the game for me. But I did end up buying the game about a month after the game came out, and I played through it all, and well, I'm kinda mixed on it. On one hand, it does a lot to not only improve on the previous gameplay formulas established, but it also was the first game in the series to actually run well. However, there are a lot of downsides that prevent me from going back to this game as much as the other ones. So let's talk about it. Starting off with the story, there's no other way I can put this. The story is straight up trash. It basically details what happened while Zelda was back in time during the events of Tears of the Kingdom. But unlike Age of Calamity, this is actually canon to the events of Tears of the Kingdom. However, I don't like it better because of that. I'm someone who liked Age of Calamity's story, and one of the main reasons for that is because I was able to see all these cool characters from Breath of the Wild more than I was able to before. However, when it comes to Age of Imprisonment, Tears of the Kingdom's lack of good storytelling bites this game in the butt. I mean, the first time I learned of the sages' names in this game was in some random social media post advertising Age of Imprisonment. I just have no attachment to these characters in this world, so getting context on these randoms means nothing to me. However, it's possible for me to get attached to new characters. I think the game did a great job building up Calamo and the hero's construct, but when it comes to everyone else, we barely get to see any of them interact. There are 6 main story chapters in the game. Plenty of time to get to know these characters. However, the entirety of Chapter 1 is a tutorial, and then halfway through Chapter 2, Ganondorf already conquers the whole world. So the rest of this story is in war mode. And even then, we only get to see the characters quote-unquote interact in Chapters 3, 4, and 5, because Chapter 6 is reserved for the final boss, which, by the way, isn't Ganondorf, but a goddamn construct. Compare this to Age of Calamity. There are 7 chapters in Age of Calamity. The first 4 are dedicated to building up the relationships with the characters, which makes the final 3 chapters hit that much harder. However, the story isn't all bad, because as I mentioned earlier, I like Calamo and the Construct, and there's a good reason for that. While all the characters are underdeveloped, Calamo and Construct are the exception. For some context, when Zelda went back in time at the beginning of the game, a shard of the Master Sword went back in time with her. This shard went into a construct taking the form of Link. A Korok named Calamo finds this construct, dubbed the Hero's Construct, and now they are friends. Calamo is a wandering Korok trying to find a place to put down roots and become a full-on tree. And throughout his journey, he witnesses the Clanker Link's numerous heroic actions and learns to become a more selfless person. And seeing their friendship, despite the construct not talking back, is really wholesome. Especially during the final boss fight, where the Construct and Calamo are in perfect sync. And the final cutscene, where the Construct dies and Calamo decides that's where he's going to put down roots, was a really touching scene. I don't know why they focused on all of this instead of the main plot that people bought the game for, but oh well, it was a nice surprise. Too bad it doesn't save the story from being
a two-pack of ass!
While the story wasn't too great, the gameplay is actually pretty good. I think it has a lot of great attributes. It's the typical Hyrule Warriors gameplay. However, Age of Calamity had mechanics taken from Breath of the Wild, such as the Wizrobe wands and the Sheikah Slate runes. However, Age of Imprisonment expands on that concept. Instead of having access to the Sheikah Slate, we have access to Zonai devices. These are really cool. While I wouldn't say I like them better than runes necessarily, I think they're a fun shakeup that adds a lot more enemy variety into the game. Also making you think more about what the fastest way to defeat an enemy is. However, there's also exclusive moves that each character has access to, which are usually used to break an enemy's stance, and I think they're pretty fun to use. However, there's another gimmick that's been added called sync strikes. Basically, when a meter fills up on two characters and you're near each other, you'll activate a sync strike, which is basically just partner moves, and these are pretty cool. What also makes it great is that as long as the character is one of the playable characters, even if they're not in your party, you can still do a sync strike with them. This adds a whole level of strategy, because in Age of Calamity you would just send all of your characters to different points on the map to cover more ground, but in this game you might want to send people in pairs if there's more powerful enemies, or your whole party to one place while you go to another. It really keeps the game fresh and makes you think more about every little aspect of the game, which I think is the main theme when it comes to this game's gameplay. This game is a lot more technical than the previous entries. While it isn't necessarily better than the older entries, I still like how this game tries to shake up the gameplay in a really unique and creative way. And then when it comes to the maps, I don't think there's too big of a difference in quality between this game and the others. However, my biggest issue with the gameplay is the character selection. I like most of them, but compared to Age of Calamity, this roster is straight trash. Age of Calamity used almost every character possible from Breath of the Wild, even adding in Calamity Ganon as a playable character, as a post-game unlock. But when it comes to Age of Imprisonment, you have the main sages, Zonai, Zelda, Construct, and Calamo, but since there are no other characters, they just added random civilians as characters, which, sorry, I don't want to play as random Joe Schmo Hylian. There's no cool post-game unlock characters. You don't get Demon King Ganondorf, like how you got Calamity Ganon in Age of Calamity. You don't get a Link skin for the hero Construct, or even something like Terrico referencing Age of Calamity. There's nothing of the sort, which really sucks. Then we have the presentation, which is okay. The game during gameplay runs at a mix between 720p and 900p at a solid 60 frames per second, and the game genuinely looks really good. These environments easily eclipse the ones we see in Age of Calamity, and the 60 FPS support is an amazing addition. Even in handheld mode, even though the resolution is lowered, I still think the game looks really good. The cutscenes, on the other hand, are
the biggest piece of dog shit.
The frame rate in the cutscenes are lowered to 30 FPS, with uneven frame pacing. You can see visible compression, banding, and blocking artifacts, especially when viewed on a higher resolution display. I mean, come on guys, did you even try? When it comes to the soundtrack, it's just as good as Age of Calamity, no surprise there. My favorite song in the soundtrack being Clash of Constructs 3. Overall, I'd say this game is pretty good. While I don't really like the story and the character roster isn't great, it's just a really fun Warriors game. And while I don't think this game is worth $70 in the slightest, and I don't think they should have charged that much, if you can get it for cheaper, it's definitely worth it if you enjoy Warriors games. I'd say it's a solid 7 out of 10. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. We're almost at 1,000 subscribers, so if we can get there, that's cool. Anyways, see you guys later. Peace.